Okay, so I'm going to be talking about critical success factors for certification to ISO 20000 and highlighting some pitfalls that you should avoid if you're going for this certification. We had IT support, and by the way, I don't want to equate IT service management to the service desk. It's a lot more than that. But we had IT support, IT service management in those days where technology and the business speak different languages. Still happens in many cases, where management doesn't really understand what IT is about and that it is an investment, not an expense. When no one understands what went wrong with an incident and no assurance that it will happen again. So incidents, incidents, and incidents again. And when people consider themselves a system, because all the knowledge is in their head and there is nothing that is automated or that is running as a system, and no way to benchmark IT quality, IT service quality. After ITSM, when you have put in an IT service management system, you should have some level of peace of mind because, as Rashid illustrated to us, you have processes that are well defined and therefore under control. And you see the full IT service life cycle and you are able to define and control it. You should have a situation where your services are more predictable, basically. You know what to expect from it. And you should have better information flow and communication between the business and IT, more control of your costs, ability to measure and benchmark, and then you have a framework that guides your best practices. Okay, so there is a difference, and that is what IT service management is all about. For those of you that like descriptions, it's defined as a process-based practice intended to align the delivery of IT with the needs of the enterprise, essentially. And it's a shift from managing IT as isolated incidents to an end-to-end service delivery mechanism. I would say that ISO 20000 is the first worldwide standard aimed at IT service delivery. It has within it 13 key processes grouped along 5 process groups, and essentially it helps you to identify your services, identify your processes, distinguish between services and processes, and improve the service delivery and the service quality that you provide to your customers, internal and external. Who can use ISO 20000? Some of you are bankers, some of you are not. I believe that the applicability is very wide. Not only bankers can use it. Essentially, it's for any organization that seeks to have its services providing some level of assurance that you are doing the right thing, that what you're doing is in line with global accepted best practice. Essentially, it helps you also to monitor, measure, and review your services and your processes and overall improve the level of service that you are providing to your customers. Let's look at the numbers very quickly. Organizations that are ISO 20000 certified. Worldwide, about 600. The last count was actually 590. A few more might have been certified in between when we did that research and now. So approximately 600 worldwide. Only three of those are in Africa. Only one is a bank in Africa, and only one is in Nigeria. I don't think I need to mention who that one is. Edition. By the way, first bank got certified to ISO 20000 2011, which is a very new standard. The former one was 2005. A number of reasons why you might want to consider it. You might want to do it if you want to prove that your IT organization has demonstrated its ability to be aware of customer needs, to respond to customer needs, to deliver service which meet defined quality levels, and make use of resources in an economical way. Okay, so this is not your word. You are saying to your management team, you're saying to your customers that you have been benchmarked by an independent global organization and you can prove that you deliver this quality because this is the standard that you adhere to. It also helps to provide competitive advantage in the market, and this is an interesting one. Not only regulators, but you might find that even clients begin to demand it. as a condition for awarding contracts, for doing business with you, okay? So before it becomes a condition, why don't we be proactive and go for it? Okay, it's also a good way to kickstart adoption to the ITIL best practice methodology. So if you're approaching it newly, if you hadn't been certified to an earlier standard, then you might want to go through a more elaborate roadmap where you first of all spend some time creating awareness to your internal stakeholders, okay, justifying the need for this certification and justifying it as relates to your own business, not on generic terms, and then determining the scope. This is very important. What parts of the organizations, what services, what locations will be covered? You don't want to choose a scope that is too small because you want it to impact on the organization. You don't want to choose a scope that is too large because it will take you too long and it will probably take out that urgency and probably also cost too much. After you've done this, you start by conducting the gap assessment. This just looks at the standard, it looks at your processes and your practices, and it determines where you are not compliant with the standard. And then you go on, having known now what you need to do, having dimensioned the remediation project, you're now able to set up a project to cover the remediation. That project will obviously have a governance structure. You need a sponsor, you need a champion, you need a manager, you need a team, you need a project plan, and so on. And then, of course, it also helps to have an external advisor, like a consultant. You implement the remediation project. This is typically the bit that takes the longest period in any certification process. The gap assessment doesn't take too long, depending on the size of your organization. But this is really where most of the work is done. Because here, you're trying to plug the gaps that were identified during the assessment. You may need to introduce new processes. You may need to automate. You may need to buy technology. You may need to write more procedures and policies and all of that. Once that has been done, then you prepare for your audit through conducting a mock audit, through putting together all your documentation, and making sure that you have your documentation well laid out. Because the standard is a lot about evidencing what you have done in line with the standard. Documentation is very important. And some people fall over here where they are doing it, but they don't have evidence that they are doing it. So this is important. And then you conduct the audit. Here you need to invite an independent external auditor to come and conduct the audit. And after that, you want to make sure that you retain this certification. You do a surveillance audit once a year and a recertification once in 3 years. Most people dread audits, because you just think, what can go wrong? But really, what is the audit trying to do? It's checking that you are in line, you are in alignment with the requirements of the standard. And it will usually try and establish 3 key things: your documentation, your familiarity with the processes. So you might be great at documentation, but you might not be doing it. So we want to test that both of them are in order. Not only that you've documented it, but you actually have a living system that is practicing those things that the documents talked about. And then adherence to the ISO 20000 processes. Those are the key aspects that the audit will follow. And this will be done through a series of interviews, documentation reviews. Usually the audit comes in 2 parts. The part 1 is a documentation review. You just give the auditor a stack of all your documents evidencing your processes, and he reviews it. If he's comfortable with that, he goes on to the second part, which is more about interviewing and exchanging and establishing the fact that you are actually implementing those processes. Right. So what then are the critical success factors? The first one, as always, is top management commitment and buy-in, active and sustained. And there are a number of ways that you can create this, even if you get in assistance. You can let them understand the implications for that standard, for getting certified to that standard, to your business. And please make sure that you are talking in business terms, not in technical terms. Accountability. You have to establish process owners for all of your processes. And you have to make sure that those process owners are held accountable. You have a zero-tolerance approach for non-delivery. You want to make sure that you have people who are competent, who understand the standard, who are what you can call subject matter experts, who can help you work through it. And then, of course, you want to make sure that you're communicating internally and externally. This team is properly trained. They've gone through training in the standard, either the implementer training or the auditor training or both. Okay, you want to make sure that you're well prepared for your audits. By the way, you will do internal audits and you will do external audits. Internal audits are done by your own people, by your own team. Okay, so you need to have people who are designated as auditors who will conduct those internal audits of your service management system. You have to have sufficient resources, sufficient money, sufficient people, sufficient subject matter experts. And it's important to appoint an ITSM manager who has the clout and who has the experience, because this is going to be, you know, the core point. If that person doesn't drive effectively, you're going to have challenges with this project. If that person doesn't have sufficient clout to galvanize others and make them do what is required, you're going to have challenges with this project. So choose this person very, very carefully. And, you know, even if it's not ISO 20000, if it's any certification initiative, make sure that you are the right person to drive it. Of course, you still have policies and processes that you have to put in place, adjust, make sure that they align with the standard, support internally and externally, and then take a process approach. Remember that the audit is not the end of the line. After the audit is still life. You have to sustain it and continuously improve to be able to ensure that you don't lose your certification. Some ISO 20000 standard specific critical factors. What we found was that in many cases, people don't really know how to define a service. So you have to carefully define your service, differentiate your service from your process. Usually we say that something is not a service except you can implement all the processes on it. So carefully define your service. Sometimes people start with too many processes. Don't have too many processes. Define them carefully. Make sure that you integrate those processes, especially your change, release, deployment, and configuration processes. Make sure that you plan your capacity effectively and understand for problems to become incidents. You can actually continuously look for ways to improve your processes, identify them as problems, and deal with them before they become incidents. What kind of pitfalls can we expect to find? Should we avoid? Of course, management support. You know, I can't stress this enough. You need to make sure that it's sustained. You also need to make sure that you are involving the generality of your IT staff. Find a role for most of them to play, to understand it. A colleague of mine was telling me we're training an organization recently, and they're an organization that's going through a major best practice implementation. And many people in the class didn't know anything about it. They were completely in the dark. I don't think it should be that way. If you want to sustain it and you want to make it a cultural change, because at the end of the day, that's what these things should be. It should change the culture of the organization. Then don't just let it be something that a team of 3 or 4 people are involved in. Find roles for other people and make sure that everybody, as much as possible, is involved. Also make sure that you have sufficient resources for the project. Otherwise, it will elongate the time. People will burn out, people will feel discouraged just because there's so much to be done and you don't have enough people and enough resources to be able to do it. Automation is helpful, but don't embrace it too early. Start with an understanding of the process. Understand the way the process works. Understand the challenges with the process before you introduce automation. So with First Bank, for example, we didn't start off with automation. Automation was introduced later in the process, and that's helpful. I see some people who want to equate certification projects for automation, you know, transformation projects. Be careful. Automation is helpful, but don't assume that the fact that the process is automated means that the process is working effectively. Don't make it a silver bullet. Again, you know, I had a client who wanted to do a particular certification a few years back. And for them, they wanted to embed everything that should go into their normal IT budget into that. You know, it was an opportunity to get management to sign off on anything and everything. The challenge with that is what? When you overpromise. because you're promising them that, you know, everything will change once we've done this, once we've implemented ISO 27001, we'll never have a security breach again. No, 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 all those things are not true. Then the minute you have a security breach, you lose credibility with your management team. So be careful with that. Also, don't make it an IT-only project. I think Rashid touched on that. Try not to cut corners. Actually implement the standard effectively. Don't underestimate the work that has to be done. Appoint a sponsor that has clout. So one pitfall is when you have a sponsor that doesn't have the clout. Several, and I won't go into them in any detail, but I will say that it helps to enter global markets, okay? And so if you look at the people who are certified, you'll see a lot of Asian companies because there's a lot of outsourcing going on there. And they know that if they're certified, then they can say to whoever the outsourcing partners are in the US or whatever, hey, look, I'm certified to ISO 20000. That should attest to the quality of my service, okay? It also helps you to measure and manage your quality levels. It provides guidance with best practice benefits. Proof that the services delivered are at par with international standards. Assurance that customer requirements are fully met in a professional, efficient way, that risks are understood and can be controlled, and that there is constant surveillance and optimization of service